Hello everyone. As I mentioned in yesterday's video, today we will be looking at the Teranet-National Bank House Price Index. Now, if you've missed yesterday's video, I'd recommend having a look at it. It's the link in the description down below because that one covered the CREA numbers for March. And it's important to understand that there's a big difference in the way that the CREA calculates their numbers and the way that Teranet calculates the numbers. I'll explain that at the very end if you're interested in the sort of the nitty-gritty of it. All right, so without further ado, let's have a very quick look at what the data tells us over here. The first thing that you will notice is the Composite 11 number that changes basically as soon as I start moving my little cursor around here. So the Composite 11 is made up of Canada's largest 11 markets. So specifically Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec City, Halifax, Victoria, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Hamilton. Right? And then for each one of them, you can click on them. For example, you want to look at Toronto and you can see exactly what has happened in the year over year and then year to date numbers. So year over year, Toronto is down 12.14%, year to date minus 1.96%, then month over month is up 0.07%. So it's more or less flat in that case over here. Now it also gives you some additional data for each one of these areas. So for example, it tells you what is the percentage of owned versus rented properties, how many one-family households are there, how many multifamily households are there, non-family households, etc., etc., etc. Also let you know what the average household income is, as well as the total value of real estate in that particular city. So for example, in Toronto, it's $2.5 trillion, and that's data from 2021. So that's the way to use this metric if in case you're interested. You can also compare that particular city to any of the cities that you have over here. Every single one of the cities that has a little asterisk, like Montreal, for example, or Ottawa, Gatineau, or Calgary, or Edmonton, the ones that have the asterisk, they're part of that Composite 11. But you can see here you also have other cities. So you can compare, for example, Guelph to Barrie to Montreal to Sherbrooke, and then, I don't know, Calgary, let's say. And you can see exactly how they've changed over time. At the bottom here, the sales pair count, that basically indicates how many pair of houses they're actually basing their data on in terms of number of sales. If this sounds confusing, again, I'll explain it at the very end. On the very top, again, that index is just literally the actual price itself, right? So very quickly here, record annual decline in the Teranet-National Bank House Price Index in March. So they're certainly not mincing their words. So what does this tell us? Well, this here, right, this is the composite. The black line is the composite index. And that composite index is from those 11 largest metropolitan areas. The blue part of the graph shows you the year-over-year percentage change in prices. For example, over here at the peak in April of 2022, for instance, it went up 19.44% year over year. And right now at the bottom here, we can see this massive decline of 6.94%. In the meantime, if you're interested in your specific market, basically here they show you what was the peak date. It shows you decline from peak and also shows you the year-over-year percentages. So the year-over-year percentages are the ones that we've seen so far, but you can also see the percentage declines from peak, and those ones are a lot worse. Now, let me just very quickly show you how the methodology works for this particular report. This graph is back from yesterday's CREA report. It showed us a minus 15.5% drop in house prices. If you don't seasonally adjust it, it was only minus 13.7%, which is still pretty bad. And both of those numbers are, about twice as bad as the minus 6.9% that Teranet is mentioning. So how on earth can one agency look at the housing data and say, well, okay, housing has declined by about 7%, so 6.9%. And the other one, just a week prior, says, well, for the exact same month, it actually declined by 13.7% if you don't seasonally adjust it, or 15.5% if you do. So are they not able to do the math properly, or is there some weird cover-up? No, not at all. It's just that they have very different methodology. The CREA uses a simple moving average. So they're looking at what is the current average house price being sold for. Okay, it's this. And they're looking at what was the average a year ago for sales. And then they'll give you the percentage change, whether it's up or down. Teranet uses something a lot more complex. All right. So they're specifically only looking at repeat sales. So unless a house has been sold for at least 2 times, they are not going to consider those sales, right? So they're going to be automatically eliminating a lot of transactions to begin with, right? And then on top of that, they will be estimating the price differences between the other houses that have sold on the market, but not in the years that they're currently comparing things to. I'm sure this sounds perfectly clear, right? No worries. I'll show it to you. I'll explain it to you in a second in greater detail. But just to highlight the fact that the Teranet data is a lot more constricted, all you have to do is look at the blue graph here, which shows you the year-over-year percentage change in house prices, right? And compare that to the black graph over here from the CREA that shows the exact same type of data in terms of year-over-year changes. It's just that because their methodology is different, in 2008-2009, according to the CREA, we had a decline of about 8.5, 8.7%, whereas the decline here was only about 6.8, 6.7% with the Teranet data. Right now, for the most recent data, we have a minus 6.9% drop here for Teranet, but the drop again was more than twice that with the CREA. Now, the thing that probably you've already noticed is this here, right? 2018, 2019, according to the CREA, we had a decline in house prices, yet this didn't record anything. I mean, it was a decline from the how high it was back there in terms of the year-over-year increases, so it was a flattening, but it didn't go negative, right? So what on earth is happening here? Well, again, let's just look at how the data works and how Teranet actually uses those data sets, right? So when they're calculating this stuff, what do? So let's look at 3 houses, A, B, C here in the same city. So we want to compare 2022 to 2023 numbers, and keep in mind, they only take into consideration sales of houses that have already sold at least twice. Okay, so every single one of these houses have sold twice since their construction. But in this case, we need to figure out exactly what is the percentage, the average percentage change, right? So obviously, 800,000 went all the way down to 680,000. That's 120,000 difference. 120,000 divided by 800,000. That gives you a minus 15% drop here. Okay, great. Now, the only other house that's sold in 2023 is this house over here, right? But that house did not get, so it wasn't sold or wasn't purchased and resold in 2022. So you cannot just assume that, okay, well, it got purchased in 2021 for $400,000, between 400,000 and 432. That's a plus 8% difference. So plus 8%, let's average plus 8% and minus 15%. No, that would be wrong, right? That's a 2-year difference. So we have to figure out a way to determine what would have been the price of this house that has already sold twice, but not in the correct year. So in that case, you need to use a third house as a comparison, right? We're going to be looking at House A. So House A went from $500,000 to $600,000. That's a plus $100,000 increase, or 100,000 divided by 500,000. That's a plus 20% here. Okay. So at this point, because they're in the same location, the idea is, well, if that house went up by 20%, then this house should have also gone up in value by 20% in 2022, despite the fact that it didn't actually trade, it didn't actually get bought or sold in that year. So 20% on top of 400,000, that gives you $480,000. Now you're taking this $480,000 and you're subtracting $432,000 that it actually sold for, and you're figuring out, okay, by how much did this particular house decline in price? And in that instance, you basically end up with $48,000 in the negative, right? Minus $48,000. That's a minus 10%. So now you're basically averaging out minus 10 with minus 15. That gives you a minus 12.5%. This is how Teranet functions. So whenever you're hearing data being reported, whether it's on the radio, whether it's on TV, whether it's on the internet, it's always a good idea to see exactly how those metrics are being used, because you might end up with very different conclusions in terms of figuring out whether the housing market is crashing or just slightly correcting. And always, always, always double check your local areas. So I actually forgot to show this in yesterday's video, but yeah, you can actually use the CREA's website to compare, again, local areas as well to get a bit more information. I mentioned it briefly, but I forgot to show the example. Anyway, so I hope you found this useful. I'll be showing a lot more data for housing over the next few weeks, so perhaps check back.